the head of JP Morgan is laying down the law and the employees are not happy. You're going to hear the audio that leaked from a Zoom meeting where he went off about work from home. It's over at JP Morgan. You're going to hear him explain exactly why.
TMZ's got every freaking thing. Big celebs, big stories, big events.
Justin Timberlake made Portland kids' dream come true.
From home is the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, and the employees there.
He runs a company and he's taking care of business.
He absolutely is. He's made a decision that work from home is over.
Yes, Jamie.
So he took this stand and he actually explained to the employees while on a Zoom call why he was making this decision. And I gotta say, I mean, from my standpoint
and mine,
this is very sound logic on Jamie's part. Obviously, the employees are not happy about it because one of them leaked this audio from that meeting, and here's what he had to say.
A lot of you were on the Zoom, and you were doing the following, okay? You know, looking at your mail, sending texts to each other about where the other person is, okay? Not paying attention, not reading your stuff. It simply doesn't work, and it doesn't work for creativity. It slows down decision-making, and don't give the work from home Friday works. I call a lot of people on Friday. They're not a person to get a hold of. And I've had it with this kind of stuff. And, you know, I come in, you know, I've been working 7 days a week since COVID. And I come in and where's everybody else?
Good for Jamie Dimon.
Good for Jamie Dimon.
I mean, they leaked this because they're thinking, oh, this makes Jamie look really bad and it's going to put pressure on him. I think this country is in the opposite than, oh,
right.
yeah,
I mean, you heard him laying out specific ways that productivity was damaged by this.
And he's right.
So I don't know what argument they have and why they think leaking this is going to change his mind.
Here's the argument, not to pour cold water on this, but a lot of people think it's hard to recruit top talent when you have this attitude, right? He wants the best and the brightest at JP Morgan, and if he's saying, I'm going to run it like a sweatshop, you may not get the best and brightest.
Well, guess what?
The best, didn't say he's running it like a sweatshop.
The best and the brightest generally don't say, oh, I want to work from home. It's just not the case. I mean,
you don't think the best and brightest can be pampered and want to feel like they handled with kid gloves?
Some of them can, but here's the deal. You work from home, you are not putting in a full day's work. And that's just the reality. You tell me, anybody...
Too many distractions around the house.
There are too many distractions, too many ways to screw around. The dog comes around, your kid comes around.
Why are we acting like we don't all know this? We all went through it when we had to.
Everybody knows the game. Everybody knows this game.
My suggestion is everyone who is so in love with work from home, forget it ever happened. Because before that, nobody was
clamoring to be at home.
We gotta be at home, we gotta be at home. Then we did it when we had to.
And it was terrible for a lot of businesses.
Yep.
It really was terrible for a lot of businesses.
It really was.
You can't unring that bell, you two old men.
Really?
You can't unring the bell. That's the problem.
Happened.
Hey,
it
Derek.
was a fever dream.
I dare
Move
you
on.
to. I dare you to try, Derek.
I mean, there's no concern about best and brightest.
You know, Kendra C from Cincinnati, I disagree. I think that you're 10 times more productive working from home. And so the tantrum that he's throwing that people don't want to come back into the office because he thinks we're more efficient working from home, the same tantrum we are all throwing having to go back into the office knowing we're more productive. But at the end of the day, he runs the company and he'll get his way and we'll have to go back into the office.
But how can you be more productive working at home? That makes no sense to me.
I have a much better work-life balance working from home.
Hold on, that's a different thing.
That's a whole different thing.
It's a different thing. Your work-life balance is one thing, but productivity.
I work during the time I would be commuting, so I actually work longer working from home than I do going into the office. Because if I'm off at 4, I'm going to be leaving that office at 4. But if I'm off at 4 and I'm at home already, I could do an extra hour. I could take an after-hours meeting. I wouldn't normally do that in the office.
And you're so productive. You're calling TMZ live from home during work.
Right? You should be working right now. Okay, we got to take a break.
All right. That was great. All right, when we come back.
This is how corporate America feels about remote work in 2023.
The laptop class is living in La La Land. It's messed up to assume that yes, they have to go to work, but you don't. It's not just a productivity thing. I think it's morally wrong.
Listen, it doesn't work for young kids. It doesn't work for spontaneity. It doesn't really work for management.
And this is how the corporate world felt about remote work in 2020, during the height of COVID-19.
The biggest advantages, I think, are access to large pools of talent who don't live around the big cities and aren't willing to move there.
Since we've all been forced into being remote now for 9 months, I think we've realized that if you have somebody in a particular location who's willing to work the hours to be able to collaborate, you can do it very effectively. So it's changed how we thought about hiring.
Let's pause here. Notice something? In fewer than 3 years, corporate leaders have reversed their approach to remote work, and it seems like this tactic has been working. The latest data from the Census Bureau found that fewer than 26% of U.S. households still have someone working from home. That's down from 37% in early 2021.
So the reason we're having this entire conversation about remote work dying is, first of all, because we kept thinking that we're going to bounce back to quote-unquote normal. When the pandemic started and we had people working from home, the idea was this is very temporary and we were all going to come back.
So really what's changed the discussion about remote work is the slowdown in the labor market. There are a lot of employers out there who had suspicions about remote work from the start. And you can see that kind of by the timing of when people actually went to being remote during the start of the pandemic. So the concerns that employers had about remote work were present all during the Great Reshuffle, but they didn't really have much of a choice. But with the emergency orders expiring for the pandemic this year, now they can actually start to bring people back and address some of those concerns that they might have about productivity.
Remote work was thrust upon us basically by the pandemic. Before the pandemic, remote work was pretty rare, so about 5% of days. We were forced to work from home. All managers and professionals were basically fully remote for much of 2020. And then it turned out it's worked really well.
Such as no commute, working in your sweatpants, doing your laundry between Zoom calls, but also just the savings in terms of time, in terms of money, in terms of your commute, in terms of being able to spend more time with your children or pick them up from school.
People quickly found ways to be productive, to continue communications together, and to keep collaborating together in whatever tools they could invest in to support that work and that teamwork.
As the world slowly started to open up, corporate America began to change its tune on remote work, so much so that some firms now even threaten to fire their employees if they don't show up at work.
Zoom, the company this is, now throwing in the towel on fully remote work.
Even Zoom, the video conferencing company that helped make the remote work boom happen in the first place, is also taking a hard line on return to office.
It's an abrupt shift from last year when it suggested a majority of its employees would work a hybrid schedule with just 2% working in person full-time.
So some of the pushback remote work is driven by concerns about productivity. There have been some experimental studies that show that there's some productivity impact potentially from remote work. But those studies are also experiments, right? It's unclear how they apply to the broader labor force.
The United States does have a productivity problem. Before the second quarter of this year, the country had experienced 5 consecutive quarters of year-over-year declines in worker productivity. In fact, a major study that Professor Nicholas Bloom co-authored found that fully remote work led to productivity declines of about 10 to 20% when compared to fully in-person work.
Now, the other important thing in the study is we pointed out, look, what firms care about ultimately is profitability. And it turns out that if you have an employee that's remote, you also save a lot of costs. So you're saving about 10% less overhead because you don't have an office. And then you can have these folks maybe nationally or internationally, maybe save another 20, 30, 40%. Remote workers, they may be 5, 10% less productive, but they are so much cheaper that it's profitable for firms to have many teams, many employees remote.
If you're coming with the stat to protect yourself, to put the positive narrative for people to return to work, I'd like to think, what were the productivity like when people were all working from home, when you're not allowed to have any face-to-face worker at all, right? So now you're spinning it in your favor. So I'd like to challenge that.
If the employee can perform their duties and handle their responsibilities, they should be encouraged to work from wherever makes them feel as excited about life as possible. I camped in Key West for 3 weeks. I was in North Dakota in February. I've been up and down the coast of California. I've been to our national parks. For me, that's where I feel best working, and that's where I've gotten my best work done. I believe we can work from anywhere.
My name is Susan Perazoli. I used to work for JP Morgan and Chase. It was all remote. But once they changed their policy to come to office, that was in Plano, Texas, but I live in California. So I decided not to move out there because of my kids. I have 2 school-going kids. I have to manage work-life balance as well. That was the reason why I quit my job. JP Morgan had given me 45 days of time frame to find another job. And I applied for some other companies and found a remote job with Leidos. So I have been working remotely with Leidos as a senior system analyst.
Perazoli is not alone in his choice to quit rather than return to an office setting. Finding a fully remote job, though, is getting more challenging. New research from Indeed found that job postings are declining faster in metropolitan areas where many jobs can be done remotely. A similar trend is playing out on LinkedIn as well.
So on LinkedIn last year, we saw that about 1 in 7 jobs were remote, and now that's down to about 1 in 11. But over this time, we've also seen an inversion. Now we see about 1 in 7 jobs being hybrid, coming up from 1 in 11 last year. So we're seeing more folks coming back into the office, but they are not coming back into the office 5 days a week.
Many employers are strong-arming their team members and that they would love remote work to die faster. As a result, I do see that remote work is, quote unquote, slowly dying and becoming more competitive to get.
The pandemic-induced shift to remote work has raised concerns about the future of commercial real estate, especially office spaces. The latest report from McKinsey Global Institute suggests that remote work threatens to erase $800 billion from the value of office real estate in 9 major cities around the world. Other experts say the empty offices created by remote work in various cities are also leading to what's been called the, quote, urban doom loop.
The problem does start with the office demand, right? And we've seen with the advent of remote work and hybrid work a dramatic reduction in office demand over these past 3 years that has led to rising vacancy rates and, in fact, to all-time high vacancy rates in the office market right now. And that does put downward pressure on the valuations of these offices. You mentioned that they're down, probably 20, 30% already. They're likely to fall by more. And that causes downward pressure on property tax revenues, because for a lot of cities, office tax revenues is a big chunk of their tax revenues, often as much as 50%. Some of that is coming from office, maybe 20%. So maybe 10% of overall tax revenues for cities comes from office. If those offices lose about half of their value, tax revenues fall, and that creates a huge hole in the budget.
So like everything, there are going to be winners and losers as we transition to a world where we have remote work as a permanent feature. One of the potential losers is commercial real estate, in part because offices aren't needed as much or they're not needed at all. So commercial real estate may be a loser for remote work. We may also be concerned about businesses that support workers who come to the office. So think about your food trucks, your laundry services, all of these businesses that are centered around folks coming into the office 5 days a week. They may face difficulties when that's not happening as much.
Commercial real estate is problematic in a number of big cities, but there are a lot of people now who are saying that we need to bring people back to the office because our commercial buildings are empty, which is a little bit like saying we need to have people use the horse and buggy because cars are going to wipe out that industry. We have to understand that the world has changed. Our ways of working have changed, and we can't go back to an old, outdated way simply because we are being motivated by commercial real estate. Commercial real estate needs to rethink. We've already seen in some cities that it's being converted, it's being used for other purposes, some of it's being converted into residential housing, and we're going to have to get much more creative about what to do with those empty buildings.
If you're pushing your employees to come back to the office, you got to make sure that they're coming back to the office for something other than meetings.
I don't think we ever will bounce back to those pre-pandemic days. What I do think we will see, and we are already seeing, is that there is a benefit to also being in person. And that's why we're seeing companies first saying, come back 1, day a week, 2 days a week, 3 days a week, maybe 4 days a week even. But I do think that the old school 5 days a week, 40 hours on the premises, I do think that's dead. I don't think it's coming back.
I'm a family person, and most importantly, I can save multiple hours by working from home, by saving commute hours, and which I can give to my family. I can give those hours for myself, which has been benefiting a lot, and I always prefer to do remotely.
Work from home is here to stay. If you're concerned about it, the best thing to do is figure out how to make it work, because it's definitely not going away.
Tonight, let them eat cake. Well, Elon Musk is letting loose on people who work from home, saying that they're like Marie Antoinette and that it is morally wrong to not work in an office.
I kind of think that the whole notion of work from home is a bit like the fake Marie Antoinette quote, "Let them eat cake." It's like really, you're going to work from home and you're going to make everyone else who made your car come work in the factory. You're going to make the people who make your food that gets delivered that they can't work from home. The people that come fix your house, they can't work from home, but you can. Does that seem morally right? That's messed up.
You see it as a moral issue?
Yes.
I mean, I see it more as
it's a productivity issue, but it's also a moral issue. People should get off the moral high horse with the work from home bullshit. Because they're asking everyone else to not work from home while they do.
And yet
it's wrong.
By the way, that was a great interview with my friend David Faber. So out front now, Kevin O'Leary, the chairman of O'Leary Ventures and one of the sharks on the hit television show Shark Tank, favorite in my home. Okay, so let's just start here with this moral high horse business. Is working from home morally wrong?
No, it's not. The world's changed. The economy's changed. The ethics of work have changed. We went through an extraordinary period during the pandemic. The idea that you split up a headquarters and you let people leave a headquarters and work from home was not even contemplated. It was considered too risky. Now it's a proven, effective method of project management. In Elon's case, to be fair about what he's talking about, when you are in a highly engineered business like Tesla or SpaceX, I get the idea that you'd want collaboration between engineers that are sitting around trying to solve design problems or whatever. But it has nothing to do with the other 10 sectors of the economy, which have already made a decision. I have 54 companies in almost every state, in almost every sector. We now know what the percentage is. It's just under 40%, are never coming back to the office.
Right, so we're not even talking about 2, 3, whatever. This is just like they aren't coming back in.
Primarily in accounting, logistics, and compliance departments in various businesses where they used to work in cubicles.
Right.
And they had to drive an hour to the office. They found a different lifestyle and they still get their work done. Now, I can make them work in the office and they'll simply say, thank you, but I'm going to work for somebody else, your competitor.
Right.
So we choose not to do that.
Right, and it's also the models themselves. So the New York Times, there's this great analysis the other day. Enough empty office space in New York City to fill 26.5 Empire State Buildings. I mean, holy camole.
New York City.
Now, there's a lot of issues around that,
Right.
but I would just say, then you've got Disney saying, okay, get back in 4 days a week. Now, I will note, get back in 4 days a week is essentially giving up on a day, which is still a huge shift in and of itself, right? 20% shift. So is it really here to stay for the majority of workers? I mean, is this what you're going to see, empty buildings?
Yeah, it's here to stay. The economy has changed, not only domestically, but globally. The way that work has changed, and if you think about, let's say, the accounting department or the let's say you've got a compliance issue and you're saying, look, we have to report to the regulator in financial services. I have many investments in financial services companies. Thursday, noon, deadline. I don't care when you do it, at 2 in the morning, or whether you get up and feed your children before they go to school. I couldn't care less, as long as on the drop-dead date, the work is done. That's project management.
Right.
And so we are, and here's the thing that you can measure it by. Prior to the pandemic, I was very fortunate in a portfolio basis to make 15% free cash flow pre-tax. Today, that same portfolio, post-pandemic, with 40% of the staff working remotely all around the world, is going to do 17.5% free cash. That's a 20% increase in free cash flow. So you can't tell me this doesn't work. In fact, I want to do more of this because I'm reducing my costs of real estate.
And one last thing here. How does this impact what you're seeing when you look at Shark Tank? You're about to start the 15th season.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, we're very proud of that.
So, you know, as a huge fan, so what are you seeing changed?
So we have a record number of applications, and there's a single reason why. It's gone back to 2008 when we started. There is no venture capital money available right now. The entire banking system has shut down because of Silicon Valley Bank and the other failures and this period of rising rates. We are going to see incredible deal flow this year, much larger than ever before. But the terms, I'm licking my chops. It's back to what I love. There's no free money, and you've got Mr. Wonderful. The royalty deal will rule this season.
This is like when I look and say, oh my gosh, can't you just like celebrate this person and give them a good day? No, and you guys, that is why you're
It's going to be wonderful. Wonderful. It's going to be, listen, there's a reason they call me Mr. Wonderful. That's it.
All right, Kevin, it's great to see you.
Good to see you too.
All right.
A Biden administration official has agreed to lock in hybrid work protections for tens of thousands of Social Security staffers. That's according to a Bloomberg report that cites an internal message. That deal will protect work from home arrangements until the year 2029. Those in-office requirements range from 2 to 5 days a week, varying by job. The incoming Trump administration's DOGE leaders, Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, have said that they plan to cull the federal workforce and eliminate work-from-home policies. They're set to meet with House Republicans tomorrow on Capitol Hill. And I guess the questions are, does it stick?
What's the point? Is it just, it's like vindictive? Now, I do remember in previous transitions, I think it was during the Bush administration, they took off all the
letters. I remember that.
Yeah, they do they leave little issues in the federal government for the incoming administration to deal with. But this just seems like, all right, we're gonna do this. We're gonna leave. So he can still. I don't know where he's in sub-Saharan Africa wandering around right now, but his staffers are doing this stuff?
Yeah, I don't know if these things stick, if you negotiate with a union, if you allow those things to go through, if it's an executive order, if it could be unrolled.
But who came up with it? It's not Biden. And who came up with it and why?
Well, Biden has proclaimed that he is the biggest union leader all the way through.
Fill in the blank. I could have come up.
No, the biggest union leader. He's proclaimed himself the biggest pro-union president ever.
So this is about
if it's a negotiation with the union, I'm not sure. I don't know enough of the details on this. But if it was a negotiation with the union, I don't know if it's executive order.
Can you reverse it immediately?
I don't know. I don't understand enough about the deal that was cut. If you make a deal with the union, can it be undone or not?
We're going to talk a little bit more about Elon Musk here because he, Vivek Ramaswamy, and DOGE have been talking a lot about this next topic, corruption, waste, how we can save money as a country because the lights are on and no one's at work. And this is something that Musk has talked about. President-elect Trump has said, members of the GOP party, they want to change that in Washington because they're empty offices that cost the government way too much money. I mean, the lights, the heat, the rent, there's nice furniture inside those offices, but nobody actually goes there because they can work from home. And there are things standing in the way of President Trump keeping a campaign promise to actually bring the people back to a 9-to-5 schedule, not in the comfort of their pajamas. News Nation's Joe Khalil just spoke with one top lawmaker pushing to bring remote workers back to in-person where we can all see them. Maybe only Fetterman wearing a sweatshirt, a hoodie, instead of every single member of the lawmaker's offices.
You know, he's one of the ones that does it all the time.
Exactly.
I've seen others. I've seen Ted Cruz and a couple of others show up to vote wearing sneakers and stuff, too. Look, this is, as you point out, Adrian, it's one of the promises that President-elect Trump has already made, which is he says he's going to be bringing all of these workers or most of the workers back into offices. And for those who don't want to comply, he says they're going to be fired. Now, that's going to be a lot harder said than done, actually. But that is, again, a promise that he made. It's an issue that the House Oversight Committee has looked at. This is the result of a Government Office of Accountability report that came out a year ago. 24 federal office buildings in D.C., 17 out of those 24 have at 25% or less capacity. So a lot of empty space that we're talking about there. And the government spends roughly $2 billion a year maintaining and keeping the lights on in all of the buildings, another $5 billion a year to lease the space. So we talked to James Comer. He's the Republican chairman of the House Oversight Committee. He acknowledged, though, the challenge in bringing all these workers back is going to be a difficult one. A lot of their federal contracts have specific clauses in them allowing for at least part-time, if not full-time, remote work. So he expects there could be legal challenges. And this is what else he told us this morning.
And this will probably head to court. But in the court of public opinion, I think the people that work hard every day and have to go to work and pay taxes, I don't think they're very happy with the fact that such a high percentage of the federal workforce is working from home, and they're not held accountable like the employees who work for the federal government who have to go to the office every day.
No, Adrian, this is not a simple situation. It gets complicated. And if you talk to some of the unions that represent some of these federal workers, what they will tell you is if you're really trying to save money, taxpayer dollars, the solution is not to look at those expensive buildings and to fill them back up with workers. The solution, they would argue, is to consolidate a lot of that workspace. Maybe the federal government can sell off some of these federal buildings and, again, make smarter use of the space you have, and then continue to allow some of federal workers to work from home or work remotely in that way, as long as they're not slacking on their work or they're getting their work done. They say that's actually the way to save money. So that's one point there. The other point is that's going to be hard. You talked about Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. They're talking about getting rid of up to 2 million federal workers was the goal they put out at the beginning. Let's remember, the federal government is the largest employer in the country. If you end up laying off hundreds of thousands of workers, that is not going to be an easy thing to do, especially because these people have families, right? I mean, they do work for the federal government. Taxpayer money pays their salaries. But if you've got all of these people being laid off and then looking for work, that in itself could be complicated. And, that may generate a lot of headlines that, frankly, the incoming administration does.
Thanks for watching. Go to
Amazon CEO Andy Jassy recently telling employees that they would have to return to the office 5 days a week. Some current and former Amazon employees blasting the plan as a way to reduce headcount without announcing layoffs. Joining us right now is Joanne Littman, Yale University lecturer and author of That's What She Said, What Men and Women Need to Know About Working Together. We're also joined by Brian Elliott, Work Forward CEO. Good morning to both of you. I'm actually surprised not by the pushback. I'm surprised by this explanation that somehow folks feel that this is a way to fire more people. It may very well be, but the memo, as far as I understand, was super explicit about the idea that they were planning to take out middle management. So the whole goal, whether you think this is related or not, is take out middle management. We think we have too much middle management, and get everybody back 5 days a week. I don't know if, and maybe those things are interconnected or not, but it almost doesn't matter. What do you say?
I agree. It almost doesn't matter. And the reason it doesn't is because what Amazon is doing is now being absolutely looked at by every other company to say, can we do this too? Can we bring back people 5 days a week? And a lot of executives want to do that. The problem is, Andrew, we have heard this every single fall. I've been here every single fall since 2020 with executives saying, now it's time. Now
it feels a lot
come
more.
back.
So, I mean, a lot of people are back genuinely now 3-4 days a week. So adding a fourth or fifth day doesn't seem totally.
They're back on a hybrid basis. I think hybrid is very, very different than 5 days a week. I really don't think that we're going to go back to that 5 day a week standard. I think that is wishful thinking.
And do you think it's a bad idea? Meaning Adam Grant is out there quite publicly saying that when it comes to what he calls deep work might be an engineer who's coding by themselves. There's periods of time where you actually have to do the work, right? I'm a writer. You have to do the work. That there are certain instances where not being in an office is actually better to actually be more efficient. But when it comes to meetings and all of the interaction kind of stuff, that clearly being in one place together is better.
100%. And that's why I believe that this hybrid situation is where we're going to end up. The hybrid, 3 days a week, maybe 4 days a week. But, you want that deep work.
Right.
You can do that at home.
Brian, what do you think about this?
Yeah, there's lots of ways where you can make flexibility like that work in a lot of different ways. You can look at companies like American Express, Atlassian, Airbnb, NVIDIA, that have all taken a much more flexible approach. And then what they do is, instead of saying, hey, here's a top-down command that says, I know the right answer as the CEO for everybody in the company, for every business unit, for every function, they actually ask leaders to figure it out. What's right for your team? And the magic of that is if your team is actually talking this through and figuring out what's the right pattern for us, you get a lot better results. You get better engagement, you get better productivity, you get better satisfaction of your employees. We all kind of get it, right? Like if you have a regional sales team, asking them to be together 3 days a week to learn from each other, to model off of each other, to do the pipeline review, to do some training, can really pay off. If you've got an engineering team that's distributed across 5 states, asking them to come into different offices 3, 4, or 5 days a week is going to strike them as being like, what are you talking about, boss? I think Amazon's moved from that sort of team-oriented way of working to I'm the boss, I know what's right, and from 3 to 5 is going to cause them loss of talent.
It sounds to me, if you talk to people in and around Amazon, that even though people put down a 5-day-a-week plan, that there is, I don't want to say there's no expectation that you're going to be there 5 days a week, but the truth of the matter is, for senior people, they're going to travel because they have to work. You talked about salespeople, they're going to travel. This whole idea of even people who are working 3 days a week, oftentimes, and one of the great conundrums that I think a lot of firms have found, is that people never worked 5 days a week to begin with. It wasn't that they didn't work 5 days a week, but they were moving around. Maybe they had to go to meetings, so they weren't in the physical office, even if they were in the same city. Sometimes they're traveling to other places. Sometimes they're bringing their child to the doctor, and so they're missing the morning. And so the whole idea that everybody needs to be in one place is not, it's not that they don't, it's just that if you lop off Monday and you lop off Friday, and then you say to yourself 1 or 2 of those other days is getting missed anyway because people are actually working but in another place, how do you set up a construct where people can actually get together in any efficient way?
That's why 5 days a week, those demands currently are not working. I've spoken to people within companies that are required to be there 5 days a week who say, it makes no sense. I talked to a manager at one of these large organizations who said, look, I'm in one office. The people who report to me are elsewhere. I don't care, and it is a waste of my time to tell them they have to be in 5 days a week because I don't care where they are. I just want them to perform.
And by the way, sometimes the managers aren't there 5 days a week.
And the managers don't want to be there either. But, the research shows, and this is why I really think we will not go back to this 5-day standard. I just think it's so outdated. And the major reason is that it is working. The hybrid situation is working. We're now at a point 4 years in where there's actual research coming out about this. Nicholas Bloom at Stanford, you guys know him well. He has a paper that came out just in June where they looked at a hybrid, I believe it was 3 days a week. They found performance did not suffer, but what did happen is employees were happier and retention improved. And then there was another study, very recent, that came from the University of Pittsburgh that found that when companies do demand people come back and be on the premises, it actually does not affect financial performance. It doesn't improve the stock price or your quarterly earnings. And so, we're seeing that it works.
Brian?
There's also a couple of things we've seen even in the past few days. Nick Bloom and Adam Grant both shared out a study yesterday that showed that if you give people the ability to work where they're most effective, to work from home or work from the office, when they're doing their individual work, you get a 12% boost in productivity. So kind of hard to ignore that one. On top of that, Joanne was talking about the mandates, like pushing people back even further. Besides the fact that it doesn't boost financial performance, it actually degrades employee engagement. And there's mounting evidence now that it does actually cause people to leave. And the people that are most likely to leave are people who've been there the longest, that have tenure, people who have been recently promoted because they have marketable skills, right? They're the ones that can find a job even in a tougher economy.
If it's
and the third one is women. There was a study that came out.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
There's a study that came out from Upwork just in July where they polled about 1,000 different C-level executives that had done mandates. 2/3 of them said that it disproportionately caused women to quit over men. and that they couldn't replace those people fast enough, and there was a knock-on effect on their productivity.
That makes sense, Joanne.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about this, about the women factor, where women lost their jobs at the beginning of COVID. We had the she-session, and we thought it would be permanent, and this is a terrible thing, but because of hybrid work, we now have a record percentage of women in the workplace, led by women of young children.
Do workers need to add return to the office to their 2025 resolutions? In recent months, companies like AT&T, Amazon, and Dell giving certain workers a 5-day-a-week in-office mandate. The federal government could also see a stronger push to get back in the office when President-elect Donald Trump returns to the White House. But do companies taking a no-holds-barred approach risk losing top talent? Joining us now is Phil Libin. He is a co-founder and former CEO of Evernote, currently CEO of a video platform made for hybrid work. Phil, welcome. I didn't remember another founder at Evernote, but what do I know? Phil, good to see you. So I know you're pro-remote work and all, hybrid work. I like people. I mean, I was just talking about how I was at the mall last week. There were all these people there. I like it when there are people at work. I think it tends to be good for younger workers to figure out how things go. I mean, is that wrong?
I like some people, John. Sounds like I just hate everybody. Look, I think return to work is a fantastic way to get people to quit. And if, lots of organizations doing it, that seems to be the point. Certainly in the federal government, a few other companies, they've really hit upon this amazing way. If you want people to quit, force them back to the office. Looking forward to whatever they're going to try next, maybe mandatory dodgeball or something. But yeah, if your goal is to get rid of a bunch of employees, then a return to office mandate for people who haven't been at the office is probably an effective way to do it. If your goal is to improve the quality of work, then maybe it's less so, right? Maybe then I would be a little bit more intentional. I think certainly being back at the office has massive advantages in some things, like you said, massive disadvantages in other things. So I think you just have to, you have to be intentional about what parts you want remote, what parts you want in the office.
I get the sense that some CEOs are trying to reset the corporate culture expectation about remote work. So the expectation should be you're here, and then maybe they'll make exceptions. Whereas things had shifted to the expectation was maybe I'm there 3 or 4 days a week, but certainly you don't expect me to be there every day.
Yeah, look, I think companies should be free to do whatever they want. They should experiment. Most CEOs, like when I ran Evernote, our average commute up in the Bay Area was about 80 minutes per person each way. So it's almost 3 hours. Now, I didn't have an 80-minute commute, right? The CEO, I live 10 minutes away. And that tends to be the case in a lot of these places. The headquarters are within, a 10, 15-minute commute of the CEO. And actually, like, one of the greatest things you can do in terms of quality of life is to not commute for more than 10, 15 minutes in a day. Now, there's clearly lots of jobs that should be done all in person in the same place. If you work at a hospital or a restaurant, or, if you're assembling rockets or something. And those companies should be placed in locations where employees can afford to live within 20 minutes. The thing that I think the world should really try to minimize is multi-hour commutes. So I am never again going to ask an employee to commute to waste 3 hours every single day sitting in traffic. I don't think that's humane. I don't think that's fair. I don't think that leads to high quality work. So if I'm ever going to have a business that requires people to be there in person, I'm going to locate it in a place where people can live within 20 minutes and pay them enough to do so. Otherwise, I'm just going to hire people remotely like I have been for the past few years.
So, Phil, given the fact that over the last 4 years and 9 months, it really has been this grand experiment in remote work and now in the return to office policies as well, what are the lessons learned? What can be improved upon to actually find a new normal or an equilibrium to this entire debate?
I think from both an employer and an employee standpoint, the most important thing is to be intentional about it, to really ask yourself that question. What kind of a company do you want to have if you're an employer, or what kind of a life do you want to have if you're an employee? And be intentional about it, because you could find both. If you want to have the kind of a quality of life that lets you live wherever you want to live, then you should do that, and you should pursue that, and you shouldn't entertain seriously jobs that ruin that. But if you want to be in an office for all the benefits that has, then you should be intentional about that. And the same thing for the companies, right? Like, we hire everyone remotely, and so we have hiring superpowers. For years now, for decades, since I've been CEO of various things, When you go to CEO school, they teach you that whenever somebody asks you what's the hardest thing about your job, you have to say hiring great people. That's the only answer CEOs are allowed to give. You have to say hiring great people. And so for decades, I've been saying, hiring great people.
Meet Mr. A. Every morning, Mr. A strolls into the office at 9 a.m., swiping his badge with perfect enthusiasm. He hits a few meetings, grabs coffee with colleagues, and keeps the daily buzz going. But here's the twist. Come noon, he sneaks out, heading home to wrap up his work in comfort. By around 5, he's clocked out. Mission accomplished. Mr. A has redefined the 9 to 5 in his own terms. And interestingly, this trend also has a name.
A new trend emerging in the back to office push, and that is coffee badging.
Coffee badging is two worlds colliding. It's employers wanting to get their workers back into the office, and employees desire to really have more flexibility on the job. And so that's coming together in this trend of coffee badging.
Coffee badging is happening because workers are using this as a soft revolt against their return to office mandates that companies have put out. And they just badge in, have a coffee, check in with their colleagues, do some work, and then leave their office early.
It is a silent protest of saying, I just want to be home.
Coffee badging was a term that Owl Labs coined as part of its 2023 State of Hybrid Work report. And what we found is that employees weren't necessarily returning to the office in a traditional 8 to 5 manner 5 days a week, but they were coffee badging. Some were going in just to show face, grab a cup of coffee, say hi to some of their colleagues, maybe their boss, so that they could check the box for their company's return to office mandate. Whereas others were going into the office for different periods of time, maybe for reasons that the office offered them luxuries that the home environment didn't, which is access to technology, which was meeting with colleagues or being in in-person meetings.
A lot of the workplace trends that we're seeing right now are very much reflective of what's happening in the overall job market.
The overall U.S. economy is performing well, but the job market is cooling. A closer look at the monthly job creation over the past 2 years reveals the broader trend, with the labor market adding just 227,000 jobs in November. Some experts note that workplace trends often mirror the job market. During the pandemic, when workers' demand was high, quiet quitting became the dominant workplace theme. But now, as the job market is tighter, particularly for white-collar jobs, coffee badging is trending.
Workplace trends reflect what's happened in the job market largely because you can tell who has the power. During COVID, the employees had the power. Employers were scared to death of losing employees, and it was a tight job market. It was very difficult to get qualified employees in the door. These days, the employer has the power because even though the job market fundamentally is still good, it's not nearly as strong as it used to be. So employees can't job hop the way that they did 2 or 3 years ago. Now, from the perspective of the employer, it's, look, we gave you your time. Now it's our time. You're going to come back to the office, and if you don't like it, you can go elsewhere.
Dynamics that we saw in the labor force a couple of years ago were very unusual. The issue is that we had much fewer workers, and a lot of power had really shifted towards employees and away from employers in the workforce relationship. That's one of the reasons we saw quiet quitting, because there was just a lot of demand for workers and people weren't that worried about losing their jobs in that kind of an environment. Whereas now we have an environment that's much more balanced.
Productivity has long been a contentious issue for supporters and critics of remote work, with mixed results in studies measuring its impact. For instance, October 2024 research from the Bureau of Labor Statistics found that productivity increased with the rise of remote work across 61 private sector industries from 2019 to 2021. However, a major July 2023 study by Stanford's Institute for Economic Policy Research reported that fully remote work is linked to about 10% lower productivity than fully in-person work.
So studies are not clear on whether remote work makes you more or less productive. There is mixed evidence there, but there are perceptions that coming together can increase productivity.
The reason there's no clear answer on this one is because it's incredibly hard to measure how remote work is impacting productivity. So it really depends on the job. It depends on the skill and the task that you're trying to complete, what industry you're in, what kind of worker you are. That makes it incredibly hard to get an exact answer to, is remote work good or bad for productivity?
When I look at the relationship between at home work versus in the office work as it relates to productivity, I have a different perspective than a lot of people because I'm not going to debate, the empirical numbers. I'm going to simply say one thing. Productivity is ultimately in the eyes of the beholder. Who has the power? In the case of the company, if the company is paying your salary, the company is giving you a paycheck, and the company says in order to justify your productivity, you need to be in the office, you have to be in the office.
The fact is that bosses like to have people on the premises. I've spent most of my career as an editor-in-chief, and I liked to have people in the office. And there's something to be said. I totally am very empathetic to the idea of culture and mentorship and creativity and all of those things. But that said, there is a reason why hybrid remote work remains so prevalent, and the reason is that it works.
News reports of companies mandating in-person work have been dominating headlines recently, with studies also highlighting crackdowns on the coffee badging trend. Owl Labs data shows 44% of hybrid employees still coffee badge. That's down 24% from 2023. Meanwhile, 70% of coffee badgers have been caught, with 16% now forced to be in office for the full day. Interestingly, some companies are also using badge data or swipe data as a tool to promote, demote, or even lay off employees.
So I wrote a book called The Algorithm about how AI is used in the workforce, to hire people, but also to monitor employees. And one of the folks that I talked to was an analyst at Gartner. One of the companies he was working with, what they did is they looked at we want to find the people that we haven't really promoted before. How can we do this? So this company came up with this idea to look at batch data. So the people who batched in early and batched out late, who had very long hours at the desk, were supposed to be more promotable than others. The unfortunate thing about that company was also when the pandemic hit and they started to have to do layoffs, they wanted to look at this kind of badging in, badging out data to understand who are the people that leave early, that have the fewest hours in the seats, and they were going to look at those to lay off.
The push by some companies against flexible work is apparent in job postings with fewer remote roles. LinkedIn data shows flexible work stabilizing at 1 in 5 listings since November 2023, down from a peak of over 1 in 4 between October 2022 and March of 2023. Indeed's chart also shows a decline in remote and hybrid job listings since their 2022 peak. As the world reopened post-pandemic, corporate America shifted its stance on remote work. Companies like Amazon now mandate employees to return to the office 5 days a week or risk losing their jobs.
Company's cloud chief, Matt Garman, saying during an all-hands meeting that staffers who don't agree with the policy, they can leave. According to the transcript that was viewed by CNBC, he said the following, in quotes, "If there are people who just don't work well in that environment and don't want to, that is okay. There are other companies around."
There are a lot of employers, I'm saying small to mid-sized employers, who are waiting on a juggernaut like Amazon to officially go ahead and push forward with a 5-day work policy because their bank account is basically the size of a small country's economy. And this is just
off at 4 and I'm at home.
Decision making.
Come on, what's your plan for today? You can't be on TV.
Yeah, Charles. I don't think that's going to happen. But head of JP Morgan is laying down the law, and the employees are not happy. You're going to hear the audio that leaked from a Zoom meeting where he went off about work from home. It's over at JP Morgan. You're going to hear him explain exactly why.
TMC's got every freaking thing. Big celebs, big stories, big events.
I gotta say, from my standpoint and mine, this is very sound logic on Jamie's part. Obviously, the employees are not happy about it because one of them leaked this audio from that meeting, and here's what he had to say.
A lot of you were on the Zoom and you were doing the following, okay? Looking at your mail, sending texts to each other about where the other person is. Okay, not paying attention, not reading your stuff. It simply doesn't work. And it doesn't work for creativity. It slows down decision making. And don't give the work from home Friday works. I call a lot of people on Friday. There's not a person to get a hold of. And I've had it with this kind of stuff. And, I come in, I've been working 7 days a week since COVID, and I come in and where's everybody else?
Good for Jamie Dimon. Good for Jamie Dimon.
I mean, they leaked this because they're thinking, oh, this makes Jamie look really bad, and it's going to put pressure on him. I think this country is in the opposite than,
I mean, you heard him laying out specific ways that productivity was damaged by this.
And he's right.
So I don't know what argument they have and why they think leaking this is going to change his mind.
Here's the argument, not to pour cold water on this, but a lot of people think it's hard to recruit top talent when you have this attitude, right? He wants the best and the brightest at JP Morgan, and if he's saying, I'm going to run it like a sweatshop, he may not get the best and brightest.
Well, guess what?
He didn't say he's running it like a sweatshop.
The best and the brightest generally don't say, oh, I want to work from home. It's just not the case. I mean,
you don't think the best and brightest can be pampered and want to feel like they handle with kid gloves?
Some of them can, but here's the deal. You work from home, you are not putting in a full day's work. And that's just the reality. You tell me, anybody.
Too many distractions around the house.
Too many distractions, too many ways to screw around. The dog comes around, your kid comes around.
Why are we acting like we don't all know this? We all went through it when we had to.
Everybody knows the game. Everybody knows this game.
My suggestion is everyone who is so in love with work from home, forget it ever happened. Because before that, nobody was
clamoring to be at home.
We gotta be at home, we gotta be at home. Then we did it when we had to.
And it was terrible for a lot of businesses.
Yep.
It really was terrible for a lot of businesses.
It really
you can't unring that bell, you tool.
Really?
You can't unring the bell. That's the problem.
Happened.
Hey,
it
Derek.
was a fever dream.
I dare
Move
you
on.
to.
It's 9 a.m. and I'm busy at work, writing my next article. Or am I? This behavior has been coined as productivity theater, a show that workers put on in the office. But now it's easier than ever as working from home became a norm during the pandemic. Enter creative solutions like mouse jigglers and other cheap tricks to remain online and give the impression that one is actively working. But employers are trying to stay ahead of the curve with the help of monitoring software or bossware to catch their staff that might be skiving or having that extended nap.
Humans, don't sit with a page of Microsoft Word up, the mouse moving for 3 hours, right? They're typing, they're saving a document, they're tabbing into other applications, they're doing a search on the internet. So it's just flagged as inactive time within Microsoft Word.
While employee monitoring software now has the capability to see everything on one's desktop in real time, from keystrokes, browsing activity, emails, chat apps, some have taken surveillance to the extreme. In China, for example, some workers have called the state of work a dystopian nightmare. These intrusive behaviors include installing cameras in toilets, using AI that flags employees who are looking for a new job, and emotion recognition systems that can assess how happy workers are in the office. What are the implications if employee surveillance becomes the new norm? Micromanagers have long existed in workplaces. But as companies grapple with rising costs and shrinking budgets, employers want to make sure they're getting their money's worth. And sometimes that means squeezing value from employees as much as possible. That has fueled what Microsoft calls productivity paranoia, where bosses worry about whether their employees are working enough. In fact, 85% of leaders have trouble believing that their workers are being productive.
It's definitely not new. There's been surveillance since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. There was punch cards for people to come in and out of factories. So there's always been a desire by employers to keep track of what employees are doing. But that has increased excessively over the last few years, even pre-COVID, largely under the guise of ensuring workplace safety and confidentiality. And
next item, as you announced in your speech.
Demand for employee monitoring software has skyrocketed since the pandemic. VPN review website Top 10 VPN reported that searches for employee monitoring software increased by 75% in March 2020. Compared to the 2019 monthly average. Demand remained strong in 2021 and 2022. Another report found that close to 80% of employers use monitoring software to track employee performance and online activity. Some managers have taken it even further, storing recordings of staff calls, emails, or messages to evaluate their employees' performance. Veriato is one of many employee monitoring software companies worldwide that has experienced a boom in sales due to the pandemic. I installed Veriato on my computer for a day to find out exactly what managers using a monitoring software would be able to see.
So yesterday, you were 1% productive because we have not selected the productivity information.
Employers can determine which sites are productive or unproductive. For example, sites like Twitter and YouTube would most likely be considered unproductive.
These are the sites you were working yesterday throughout the day. Google.com, Google Chrome, login window, Outlook. This is the bifurcation of the whole day.
Screen captures were done every 5 seconds, and no surprise, every conversation I had on Slack and Microsoft Teams was captured as well. One of Veriato's latest features utilizes psycholinguistics, where employers could get an indication if workers are satisfied at work through their language.
There are by default some keywords which we have already put, like president, interview. Somewhere you have written interview. That's why it got alert.
Is it because employers want to know if their employees are leaving for a next job?
We always put it in a very positive way. It's always good for the employer to know if the employee is looking for a job. Maybe they are not happy with something. So they can have a candid discussion with them.
But these tools are not just for monitoring employees' productivity. During the pandemic, employee identity theft and other fraudulent activities were on the rise as more work-from-home initiatives were introduced. That meant more gaps in security. According to cybersecurity firm Checkpoint, cyber attacks in Asia-Pacific increased by 168% year-on-year in May 2021. And in a separate report, IBM said that Asia is now the most targeted region for cyber attacks, with Australia, Japan, and India the hardest hit. Monitoring tools can help increase a company's online security and reduce the risk of data breaches.
Now you have employees all over the place. And so part of that contract between the employee and the business is I'm going to take a corporate device to a personal location. I think a lot of employees understand if I can have this flexibility, it's okay for the company to be understanding what's happening on my work device.
But not all employees feel the same way. Research has shown that those who know they are being watched report feeling more anxiety and pressure to work longer hours. In fact, a study showed that employee monitoring has great potential in backfiring. Monitored employees were substantially more likely to take unapproved breaks, disregard instructions, and purposefully work at a slow pace. Arjun is a software engineer who worked for the startup remotely in Canada.
My manager would bring up some statistics in our one-on-one meetings. There would be statistics like, oh, you're idle for X amount of time, but I was finished early, and they're like, oh, you should be working on something else.
Time Doctor, another employee monitoring software, was installed on his company laptop.
If I don't move anything on my computer, they know that, and I hate that because most of the time when I work, I'll focus on a task for a little bit and then I'll maybe take a break, watch a YouTube video.
Employers can also compare the productivity scores of workers, identifying the high performers and those who are not.
I think it does kind of help be a little bit more productive, but at the same time, it's also counterintuitive because what I would do is I would try to make my tasks longer to fill in the time. In my head, I was like, well, I do it as fast as I can because no matter what, they're still tracking me for a certain amount of time.
Jaya Das is a HR expert and the managing director of Randstad Singapore and Malaysia. She believes that employee surveillance could have negative impacts on organizations in the long run.
If surveillance intent is to control, to make sure that my employee is seated for X number of hours at the desk, that they're not surfing social media, then the entire basis of remote working is lost. That is a breach of trust. That is a breach of personal privacy. That is observing the human being as a commodity. You're not managing the emotional and the mental state of the employee, which is actually the real essence behind productivity, engagement.
As artificial intelligence and machine learning push the boundaries of employee monitoring, there has been more scrutiny over whether existing laws are enough to protect workers' privacy.
Over the past 2 years, how many times have you heard that the times have changed or about the new normal? There's no shortage of opinions about whether remote work is for the better or spells destruction for our businesses. Reed Hastings, CEO of Netflix, said, "I don't see any positives." Whereas Suresh Kumar, CTO of Walmart, said, "We haven't just coped, we've actually thrived." But what does the research say? How can we know, not just think, that hybrid working actually works? There's so many questions. What's the right balance of work from home versus work from the office? And who gets to decide? Is it managers? Is it the employees? Is it both? How long can a given employee actually remain productive working from home? Is there a limit? And who gets to work in each way? What it should be based on in terms of criteria? Should it be based on seniority, task, personal situation? The list goes on and on. So many questions, and unfortunately, no simple answers. The reason these questions are so hard to answer is because we're thinking about hybrid work design as a single problem. One problem to solve, when in fact, it's actually three different ones. The first problem is, are we able to effectively deliver on our stakeholder commitments? This is otherwise known as the effectiveness debate. The second is, will we be able to attract and retain the talent that we need? This is the staffing discussion. And the third is, can we maintain or even cultivate, nurture our culture? This is the talk about social fabric. Let's take a minute to highlight the challenges inherent in each one. I've been working with a range of organizations over the past 2 years, helping them determine what their future of work should look like. Now, I'm not here to make a broad statement that remote work is or is not universally good. I think we're all smart enough here to know that nothing works all of the time. I am, however, here to warn you that we need to be wary of our data. Let me give you a couple of examples. Many people point to their organization's effectiveness during COVID as proof that they're actually good at remote work. Now, it is proof that remote can work, but not that it necessarily will. COVID was a massive social experiment with unique conditions. Most organizations dealt with it by cutting the fat and becoming laser focused on short-term efficiency. In effect, we were productive because we were in survival mode. But the question we have to ask is whether that's sustainable. Data shows around the world that people's working hours have increased, and many say that they actually find it harder to delineate work-life boundaries. Data also shows that the experience wasn't the same for everyone, with The Economist data showing that parents of school-age children experienced much greater stress than many others. And data from Microsoft shows that it's actually even changing the way in which we work, with people working more hours but less collaboratively. The question of whether we can effectively work remotely needs a contextual answer. Contextual based on the people who are doing the work and the tasks that they're trying to accomplish. Remember, one size fits none, and we need to think about the sustainability of our effectiveness.
Is it good? Is it bad? Is it going away? Is it here to stay? We just can't get on the same page about work from home. I'm Rosemary Miller here with Jenna McGregor, a senior editor here at Forbes, here to give us some work from home data. Thank you so much for joining me today, Jenna.
Thanks for having me, Rosemary. Good to see you.
Absolutely. So, Jenna, based on only 34% of Americans are satisfied with how much they're paid at work.
I wish there was like an exact guide of what you should be paid and what everyone else should be paid. There's just not anything like that out there.
I was accepting crumbs because I thought it was a really huge deal that I was working for this major news organization. $40,000 was the most that I've ever made in my life. So I thought it was what you're supposed to be earning at that stage in my career. But what I have learned from that experience is closed mouths don't get fed, and always keep yourself educated.
Most of the time, the people who are paid more, it's just because they asked for it.
To get a salary adjustment can be really, really difficult to do. There are some employers who really want you to shake them down in the sense that they will match an offer if you get it from someplace else. It's a bad practice, but it is pretty common.
Sometimes it's easier to just jump ship.
Here's how to figure out if you're being underpaid and what you can do about it.
In 2016, I worked for a major news organization in ad sales as an account executive. I was an immigrant. I was here on DACA, so I was very appreciative of such an amazing opportunity. I was making $40,000 a year. I really thought that that was, a lot of money at the time until I had like a casual conversation with my coworker who was actually complaining about making about $102,000 a year. It never occurred to me until that conversation that I just, I was severely underpaid.
Around 1 in 20 workers in the US said they would quit if they found out their coworkers earned more money than them. And 63% said they would demand equal pay.
You can certainly ask other people doing similar jobs in your own organization how much they're being paid. The question, though, is figuring out whether the people you're talking to are really doing the same job that you're doing in all ways that matter.
I was a really great account executive. I always hit or exceeded my quota quarter after quarter. At times, I can argue that I was actually doing a lot better than my counterpart that was earning significantly more than I was. I think the only difference between her and I is that she was a lot better at the political side of things.
60% of US workers say they didn't negotiate for more money when they were last hired.
The difference between someone who gets $55,000 and $60,000, a lot of times is just because person number 2 just asked for $60,000. It's not because they're better at their job. It's not because they're more experienced. It is simply because they just asked for it.
Given the fact that I was an immigrant at the time on DACA, I was always thankful for just any opportunity that came my way. I was accepting crumbs. That experience has kind of pushed me to not accept crumbs and to always push and go after more in my life.
A discrepancy in pay between 2 comparable employees may be due to market conditions.
So there's this issue that's called compression, and compression means that people are being paid differently on otherwise identical jobs because on what the job market happened to be like when they were hired. The big place we see this most commonly is people who've been hired a couple of years ago, and then somebody new comes in and gets paid more than they are because the job market has tightened. Their skills are scarce now, and they're paid more than you are.
My initial reaction, I kept it calm, and I didn't want to allude to her that I made such little money compared to her. I kind of went back to the drawing board. I thought to myself, okay, clearly I'm underpaid. What am I going to do about it?
When you realize that you're underpaid, that is your green light to go do research.
The term underpaid shouldn't be used to compare you to a colleague. It should be compared to you and the market. There's always going to be a range of the market.
It's possible that an objective person might say you're wrong, that these pay differences are not really that different, or there's justifications for them.
Compensation has a lot of different pieces to it. It's not just like a simple formula that's like years of experience equals this amount of money, education equals this amount of money, and location equals this amount of money.
In addition to speaking to people in your industry, you can do research online. One way is through referencing salary ranges listed on similar job descriptions.
There are states and cities that have transparency laws on pay that require the employer to report or make available what they're paying. But the caveat to that is that what they end up reporting are typically salary ranges for a job.
When you see a range, and I think I see this with my clients and I see this with candidates, they automatically think, well, I deserve the high end. That's just natural. But that's where the disconnect becomes between the candidate wanting the high end and the company knowing, well, that range is not actually true.
I would say that when recruiters and hiring managers and companies are putting those numbers up, it's always with the expectation you're probably going to fall somewhere in the middle. Usually the range that they put is the minimum and what's likely the highest that they are willing to pay for that position. Even with sites like Glassdoor, Indeed, Blind, Levels.fyi, Salary.com, Built In, and I use all of these as data points for compensation, but the best way to find that data is really by tracking the jobs that you're applying to and looking at those salary ranges, right? Especially if it's in your location, because location is such a big data point when it comes to compensation. And sometimes I'll have people who will look at positions that for the states that are required to post salaries like New York and California, which are really, really high cost of living areas. And they'll be like, okay, well, this customer success position is paying $170,000. Yeah, it's paying $170,000 for a unicorn company in California, but you live in Tempe, Arizona, which is probably not going to pay the same amount.
At the end of the day, companies are teams, and they're going to pick the best players for the best value.
I decided to continue on as if nothing ever happened, as if I haven't heard anything, and do some market research just to understand how much it is that I am worth, given my experience, what experience that I've had in the past that's transferable, and then take that research with me onto finding a brand new job.
Meet John Doe. He's in his early 20s and eager to jump into the workforce. He sees a job listing that looks perfect to him. So he brushes up his resume, he writes an awesome cover letter, applies, and then waits. And waits. So after a month or so, he actually sees the same job posting relisted, which makes him super frustrated. John isn't alone. Many people are frustrated by applying to these kinds of jobs that seem to have no intention of hiring anyone.
If you are in the position of trying to find a new job, of course you don't want to waste your time applying for these ghost jobs.
But it turns out all those open job postings that you see online might not even be real.
Ghost jobs are a phenomenon that have existed for a long time, but they've come to light much more in recent years, and they've become much more of a significant issue in the job market.
4 in 10 companies posted fake job listings in 2024, and 3 in 10 are currently advertising for a role that isn't real, according to a May survey from Resume Builder.
The rise of ghost job posting definitely points to a cooling in the economy. We are seeing that employers are more hesitant to make that hire, and it just points to the fact that demand for talent is slowing down.
Here's why ghost jobs are on the rise.
Ghost jobs are actually not scams. They're from real companies, but they are openings that don't actually exist. That company is not actually hiring for that role at this moment in time. They might be interested in hiring for that role in the future, or maybe they were hiring for it, but due to budget cuts, those roles were closed or put on hold.
A ghost job is essentially a job that remains open online and never gets filled. The occurrence of ghost jobs has increased quite dramatically over the past 5 years. We're seeing a decline in the rate of hires to job postings, and that rate has basically halved over the past 5 years. So whereas in 2019, we saw 8 hires per 10 job postings, we are now seeing 4 hires per 10 job postings, which of course is quite a dramatic drop. This is a pretty worrying development because it just softens the signal of what a job posting really means. And
we turn in the meantime to the massive layoffs playing out today of government workers, thousands of them at multiple federal agencies, including the Department of Education, the CDC, and Veterans Affairs. And tonight, ABC News learning that hundreds were laid off at the National Nuclear Security Administration, the agency that maintains America's nuclear stockpile, before they were called back. Here's Mary Bruce.
Tonight across the country, tens of thousands of federal workers, from the Department of Education to Health and Human Services, from Veterans Affairs to the Department of Energy, suddenly told they are out of a job.
Last night, I got an email around 9 p.m. Saying that my position was terminated.
In Greensboro, Georgia, Carly Arata worked at the Department of Agriculture.
I saw the subject of it and I kind of screamed. I didn't think it was real at first, so I reread it like 3 times and then kind of started crying because, I was relying on this job. My husband and I just purchased this house in December, and now we're not really sure what we're going to do.
In a meeting at the Office of Personnel Management, some employees were told to, quote, gather your personal belongings and exit the premises. ABC News obtaining this audio.
You will receive your termination notice via email shortly, and it will include the reason for termination. As a result, your employment with the Office of Personnel Management will end today.
The layoffs across at least a dozen departments and agencies, all part of an effort to cut government costs. Spearheaded by Elon Musk, who told an international conference that whole agencies would have to go.
We do need to delete entire agencies as opposed to leave part of them behind.
The administration first targeting the roughly 200,000 federal employees who have been on the job less than a year. At the Department of Energy, at least 2,000 workers let go, more than 1,000 people fired from Veterans Affairs, and another 1,000 from the CDC. Among them, half of the agency's so-called disease detectives, doctors and scientists who fan out across the country and the world to respond to outbreaks. But this process has been far from smooth. Sources tell ABC News yesterday roughly 300 employees at the National Nuclear Security Administration, the agency that maintains America's nuclear stockpile, were fired. But today, multiple sources tell us those firings were put on hold. Managers frantically calling the fired employees back, telling them as of now they're not fired after all. Their security badges turned back on and their access to federal systems restored, at least temporarily. The firings sending shockwaves through the federal workforce. But President Trump today saying this dramatic workforce reduction is all part of the plan.
We want to downsize government, but make it better. Run it better, but downsize.
And David, this is only the beginning. All day long, we've been learning of more and more cuts at these agencies. Tonight, word that Homeland Security is cutting over 400 employees, including 200 from FEMA. And workers we've talked to say it just feels so haphazard. No 2 weeks notice, no guidance on benefits, just told to pick up and leave. David.
Mary Bruce at the White House tonight. Mary, thank you.
The Trump administration is digging in for what could be a long legal fight over plans to reduce the size, scale, and cost of the federal government. At least 8 lawsuits have already been filed just on behalf of independent inspectors general who were removed from office after President Trump returned to the White House. Now the administration is asking the Supreme Court to step in and allow the president to fire the head of an independent federal agency tasked with protecting whistleblowers. More federal workers are expected to be fired in the days ahead. Thousands of new hires have been targeted across at least 20 agencies, including the Department of Veterans Affairs and the Department of Education. Many are probationary employees, so mostly new hires who are still in their trial period. The latest mass firings are part of DOJ's continued efforts to cut government costs. Let's bring in CBS News White House reporter Willie James Inman, who is with us from West Palm Beach, Florida. Willie, what is the Office of the Special Counsel, and why does the president want the head of it to be removed?
Hey there, Lindsay. Good to be with you. It's a great question because this is different than, say, the Special Counsel's office where Jack Smith was appointed. Of course, Jack Smith investigated the president on his retention of classified documents and election interference or alleged election interference. This office essentially protects whistleblowers, those government employees that want to transmit information to the Office of the Special Counsel to look into wrongdoing in the government. And I also want to bring up for our viewers, or just say to our viewers, one of the primary missions, and we got this from the website of the agency, is to safeguard federal employees and applicants from prohibited personnel practices. Of course, it is guarded by a couple of different laws, including the Hatch Act. So this is clearly an office that is very important and key to federal employees being able to report wrongdoing. But the president here really wants to exert his executive authority. We saw that being the case with the firing of multiple inspectors general. The president here looking to do that, and with this case being at the Supreme Court, I'll note that Hampton Dillinger, who in this case is fighting against this, saying that he was fired basically without cause, saying that the White House has to give specific reasons as to why he should be fired and should lose his employment. He said that no problems with his job performance were described in the letter that was sent by the Trump administration to let him go or to fire him from his role. So we'll have to wait and see what happens at the Supreme Court. It's a holiday today. Perhaps it'll be on the official docket tomorrow, and we'll perhaps see a reaction from the Supreme Court then, Lindsay.
Well, I have to be quick with you because we have so much ground to cover with you, but correct me if I'm wrong. Is there sort of a process before a case can go to the Supreme Court, or the president is just saying, let's just have them try and decide? I mean, they can decide not to take up the case and have lower courts rule first, right?
Yeah, they certainly can, and this has already been at the lower court level, and that's what's happening here. It's making its way through the administration looking to usurp or looking to change the outcome in terms of the lower court ruling, because that lower court essentially ruled for the most part in the favor of Dillinger, for him to be able to be back on the job, at least for a short time, until this was decided. So clearly the administration looking to say that, look, we have the executive authority, we have the power to remove this person, this individual, but he himself, Dillinger, fighting this and saying that he was fired basically without cause, Lindsay.
All right, let's talk about some more of the cuts that we're hearing about. We're hearing about the firing of hundreds of FAA employees, Federal Aviation Administration. Of course, this is weeks after that tragic midair collision between a military helicopter and passenger jet near D.C. Today, we know that DOJ will be visiting the agency's command center. What is the president's plan for the FAA?
Yeah, we know that DOGE is expected to talk with some of the employees at the FAA, most notably perhaps some air traffic controllers, to have a look at the type of equipment that they're using, what they like and what they don't like about the equipment. Now, people who are experts in this field of aviation will tell you that the FAA, the people who really just control and make sure that our skies are safe, are using some antiquated equipment, and that it is just years behind what is needed to upgrade that system. So that perhaps is in the works here with DOGE coming in, with Elon Musk.
I think the person who currently occupies the White House has no business being there and is making a chaotic mess of our country.
It's just ridiculous that these things are going unchecked.
Hey, hey, ho, ho. Elon Musk has got to go. Hey, hey, ho, ho. Elon Musk has got to go.
If you bought a mattress today, no judgment, but that is how thousands of our fellow Americans decided to spend their day today. It is what is being called the Not My President's Day protests. They are protesting in Portland, Oregon, in Vancouver, Washington, in Orlando, in Arizona, in Utah, in West Virginia, holding signs that say, "No kings, where law ends, tyranny begins." In Houston, chanting, "No one voted for Elon Musk." Organizers say the protests are in response to, quote, "the anti-democratic and illegal actions of the Trump administration," including what can only be described at this point as a purge across multiple government institutions, like the VA, which provides health care to America's veterans, and USAID, which provides humanitarian aid all around the globe, and the Department of Education, and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and the National Animal Health Laboratory Network, which, in plain English, they're the people who protect us from the next bird flu, or the one that's here now. But as the Trump administration is learning, when you use a blunt instrument instead of a scalpel or a budget plan.
This Delta flight 4819, operated by Endeavor Air, that's a wholly owned regional airline by Delta Airlines, was coming into land on runway 23 at Toronto Pearson International Airport. Pretty windy day there, winds gusting up to 35 knots, about 40 miles per hour. And you can see the evacuation that was successful with a capital S right there on the runway at Toronto Pearson. Folks coming out through the R1 door just behind the pilot's bulkhead there at the backside of the cockpit in the front of the first class cabin. And then the mid-wing exit where they were able to get out and essentially walk away from this crash. I want to show you this incredible new video taken from the evacuation inside the plane that was inverted. The floor, now the ceiling, the bins, the overhead bins, now on the floor. And I want you to watch this now. This is actually the first time I'm seeing it too. Watch.
Everything, drop it. Come on. Go take it back.
The instructions there from the flight attendant: drop it, drop everything, drop it. That is critical, especially in a evacuation like this. You want to leave everything behind and not hamper your way out of the airplane, especially because we saw scenes of this plane on fire. The black smoke was pouring out almost right away as the airport rescue and firefighting crews came up with incredible rapidity. Hats off to them for putting out what appeared to be a fire there, at least on where the right wing used to be. That is where the fuel is stored for an airplane like this CRJ 900. The configuration of this plane, 76 seats, and all of them were full. 4 members of the crew, so 80 people in total. We've seen reports vacillating between 15 and 18, injured 2 to 3 with critical injuries. But pretty incredible that this full flight, essentially everybody leaving with their life, a very different story compared to 19 days ago when we were covering the disaster, the midair collision over the Potomac River, where all 67 people lost their lives. A really incredible and miraculous outcome here, Wolf.
Certainly true. Pete, stay with us. I want to bring in some more of our aviation experts right now for some serious analysis. Peter Goals, how could a plane like this end up flipping the way it did?
Well,
We won't know for sure until the Canadian Transportation Safety Board does their investigation. But as Pete indicated, crosswinds, there were gusts upwards of 40 miles an hour. It could easily have clipped a wingtip and catapulted down the runway. It's happened before, and it is extraordinary that everybody got out of that plane alive.
Mary Schiavo, have you ever seen a plane upside down on the runway like this? What do you think may have happened?
Well, not exactly like this, but similar. And as Peter said, in those cases, in those other accidents, one was Aviation in San Francisco, one was United Airlines in Sioux City, and then a couple smaller planes. What happened is they came in on Aviation, they clipped the seawall, and then they didn't come in straight and level, and one wingtip hit the runway, and then the plane cartwheeled. Same thing in Sioux City. They had a gust of wind right as they came in. It was a long explanation leading up to that, but the wingtip hit, and then they flipped. And then in some other accidents, that was the same thing. And in others, it's where they have exited the runway and encountered something such as an embankment or other equipment that then caused them to become inverted. But in a scene like this, it is where a wingtip is hit. In many cases, it breaks the wing off. The wingtip is hit and the plane rolls. Fortunately here, no fire. In those other ones, there was fire.
Yeah. Pete Montine, I want to play a little bit more of that new video of the evacuation. Once again, the slide clearly did not deploy here. Talk about the process of evacuating an upside down plane.
You know, I don't know if a CRJ like this even has slides, Wolf. It is really critical to get out because seconds mean lives, and everybody here escaped with their life. We saw in that first image there, in the first few frames of video, the overhead bins, now the floor, and folks clearing them to try and get out of that overwing emergency exit to get out onto the runway and into the biting cold, about 18 degrees Fahrenheit there in Toronto, not countering in the wind chill. This is something that is pretty harrowing, and this is a good reminder that flight attendants are not just there for your convenience, they are also there for your safety. They are aviation's first responders. We know it was a crew of 4, so 2 pilots, 2 flight attendants trying to get everybody out and away from this airplane. In some cases can be a ticking time bomb. Fire is very serious, and we know there was at least some smoke, which means fire in an airplane like this, and the airport firefighting and rescue crews did a marvelous job of putting it out very quickly. But a fire is about as serious as it can get in aviation. It's on a scale of 1 to 10, that's really an 11. So to get people out quickly and safely without many serious injuries is really key. Important to remember, a lot of injuries can happen after the plane comes to a rest. So taking off your seatbelt when you're now hanging from the seatbelt in your seat upside down can cause injuries too. When you release it too soon, that's when people get head and neck and spine injuries. It can be very dangerous. So it's really, really critical to pay attention to what the flight crew is telling you. And you have to imagine the terror that the passengers were feeling here was probably a pretty bumpy approach, but then they're in a dark passenger cabin with what appears to be maybe at least one side blocked. The left side of the airplane looked at least partially blocked based on the way the angle of the plane is rolled there, and trying to get out of only one set of emergency exits. This is clearly not a very ideal situation, and everyone did a very good job getting out.
Yep, that's very important. Peter Goals, we know at least 15 people were injured, 2 critically injured. 80 people in total were on board, 76 passengers, 4 crew members. What does the relatively low number of injuries tell you?
Well, it clearly underscores the effectiveness of 16G seats, Wolf. These are seats that have been mandated since the mid-2000s. Of final rule in 2009 that said that aircraft have to have seats that can withstand a 16G impact, which this clearly was. And if by having those seats, passengers remain secure and in place if their seatbelts are on tight. Previous to that, we saw numerous accidents where passengers survived the impact on the ground, but were thrown helter-skelter within the cabin, and many died. So this is a real tribute to a government regulation that saved lives.
Yeah, the key is to have your seatbelt on and to have it on tight to make sure that you're protected. Mary, strong winds were reported around the time of the crash earlier today in Toronto. How much could that have played a factor in all of this today?
It could be a huge factor. And as Pete was just reading off the weather conditions and what the plane was facing, this aircraft, I was on one of these same ones going into LaGuardia, and so I happened to look up the limitations. The crosswind limitation on landing is 35 knots if the runway is dry and clear and clean braking action. If you don't have good braking on ice on the runway, your crosswind limitation is 15 knots. If they had enough to get down and they were coming into land, they could have been in the right, but at the last minute got a bad gust that upended them. And I've had that happen to me when I'm flying, and it's terrifying. I literally had the plane sit up on one wingtip. Now, I was lucky. It didn't catch the wingtip, but if that happened right as they hit the runway, even if they were within their aircraft limits, there wouldn't be much they could do about it except try to fly out of it.
Yeah, the winds are very, very critically important. I was flying into Washington Dulles Airport last night, and it was really windy, and the plane was bumping up and down as we were coming in. Fortunately, it was a safe landing and all of that. Pete, let me play a little bit more of that air traffic control transmission from before the crash in Toronto. Listen to this.
Toronto Tower, Endeavour 4819, I'm tagged. That was 23. Endeavour 4819, Toronto Tower, wind 270, 23, gust 33, clear to line on 823. You might get a slight bump in the glide path. There'll be an aircraft in front of it. Clear to land, 23, Endeavour 4819.
So, Pete, what could the air traffic controller have meant when he said, and I'm quoting now, slight bump in the glide path?
Well,
What does that mean?
Let's go through it sort of line by line. That's the airplane, Endeavour 4819 or Delta 4819. You buy a Delta ticket, but the flight is operated by Endeavour Air. Checking in with the tower controller saying that we're on the approach to runway 23, meaning they're lined up. They were on the ILS, that's Instrument Landing System, essentially a radio beam that gets you lined up with the runway and on a glide path and a stable approach. And the data shows that the approach looked okay, may have been a little bit bumpy, but it looked like they were stabilized, they were on altitude, they were on speed, looked okay. The tower controller then gives them a weather report, essentially telling them the winds. Winds 270 at 23, gusting 33. So that means winds out of the west at 23 knots, gusting 33 knots, so about 40 or so miles per hour. That's a pretty stiff wind, and it's at an angle to the runway of about 40 degrees. It has about a 40-degree bite into the relationship, the heading of the runway. And typically in a crosswind, pilots will essentially, if this is the runway and the wind is coming from this direction, they'll point into the wind. It's called a crab, and essentially track straight down the runway, even though the airplane is pointed a different direction. Or they may put one wing into the wind and slip down to try and make it so that they could stay lined up with the runway. Out and essentially walk away from this crash. I want to show you this incredible new video taken from the evacuation inside the plane that was inverted. The floor, now the ceiling, the bins, the overhead bins, now on the floor. And I want you to watch this now. This is actually the first time I'm seeing it too. Watch.
Give everything, drop it. Come on. Go take it down. Get going away.
The instructions there from the flight attendant, drop everything, drop it. That is critical, especially in a evacuation like this. You want to leave everything behind and not hamper your way out of the airplane, especially because we saw scenes of this plane on fire. The black smoke was pouring out almost right away as the airport rescue and firefighting crews came up with incredible rapidity. Hats off to them for putting out what appeared to be a fire there, at least on where the right wing used to be. That is where the fuel is stored for an airplane like this CRJ 900. The configuration of this plane, 76 seats, and all of them were full. 4 members of the crew, so 80 people in total. We've seen reports vacillating between 15 and 18, injured 2 to 3 with critical injuries. But pretty incredible that this full flight, essentially everybody leaving with their life, a very different story compared to 19 days ago when we were covering the disaster, the midair collision over the Potomac River, where all 67 people lost their lives. A really incredible and miraculous outcome here, Wolf.
Certainly true. Pete, stay with us. I want to bring in some more of our aviation experts right now for some serious analysis. Peter Goals, how could a plane like this end up flipping the way it did?
Well, we won't know for sure until the Canadian Transportation Safety Board does their investigation. But as Pete indicated, winds, there were gusts upwards of 40 miles an hour. It could easily have clipped a wingtip and catapulted down the runway. It's happened before, and it is extraordinary that everybody got out of that plane alive.
Mary Schiavo, have you ever seen a plane upside down on the runway like this? What do you think may have happened?
Well, not exactly like this, but similar. And as Peter said, in those cases, in those other accidents, one was Aviation in San Francisco, one was United Airlines in Sioux City, and then a couple smaller planes. What happened is they came in on Aviation, they clipped the seawall, and then they didn't come in straight and level, and one wingtip hit the runway, and then the plane cartwheeled. Same thing in Sioux City. They had a gust of wind right as they came in. It was a long explanation leading up to that. But the wingtip hit, and then they flipped. And then in some other accidents, that was the same thing. And in others, it's where they have exited the runway and encountered something such as an embankment or other equipment that then caused them to become inverted. But in a scene like this, it is where a wingtip is hit. In many cases, it breaks the wing off. The wingtip is hit and the plane rolls. Fortunately here, no fire. In those other ones, there was fire.
Yeah. Pete Montine, I want to play a little bit more of that new video of the evacuation once again. The slide clearly did not deploy here. Talk about the process of evacuating an upside-down plane.
You know, I don't know if a CRJ like this even has slides, Wolf. It is really critical to get out because seconds mean lives, and everybody here escaped with their life. We saw in that first image there, in the first few frames of video, the overhead bins, now the floor, and folks clearing them to try and get out of that overwing emergency exit to get out onto the runway and into the biting cold, about 18 degrees Fahrenheit there in Toronto, not countering in the wind chill. This is something that is pretty harrowing, and this is a good reminder that flight attendants are not just there for your convenience, they are also there for your safety. They are aviation's first responders. We know it was a crew of 4, so 2 pilots, 2 flight attendants trying to get everybody out and away from this airplane. In some cases can be a ticking time bomb. Fire is very serious, and we know there was at least some smoke, which means fire in an airplane like this, and the airport firefighting and rescue crews did a marvelous job of putting it out very quickly. But a fire is about as serious as it can get in aviation. It's on a scale of 1 to 10, that's really an 11.
Yeah.
So to get